Welcome! In this last PowerPoint presentation, we will be covering some of the final phases of education sector plan development, developing a multi-year action or operational plan, and defining implementation arrangements. We will first dive into developing action plans, with step-by-step instructions of how to develop a multi-year action plan for your priority program. We will then briefly cover implementation arrangements and capacity, and finally, describe the last steps of ESP validation and endorsement. Note that action plans are also referred to as operational plans or implementation plans. Operational or action plans are very helpful for successful implementation and monitoring of the ESP, as we saw in last week's presentation. Action plans outline the detailed activities for a specific period of the plan, including information on specific action steps, timing, roles, responsibilities, and costs. Action plans should generally be drawn up with the medium-term expenditure framework and be linked to the national budget process, so that it can feed into annual budget preparation. Action plans may be annual, covering 1 year, or multi-year, covering multiple years of ESP implementation. Here is an example of a basic multi-year action plan for our ECE priority program. As you can see, it includes more detailed action steps for each of our activities, along with costing information, the body responsible for implementation, and timing over the 5 years of the plan. We will now look at how to fill it in together, step by step. You can first simply copy your strategies and activities into the relevant boxes in the template. The next step will be to break down each activity into more detailed action steps. Ask yourself, what are the main steps that will need to occur to implement this activity? For example, for activity 1.1.1.1, foster free public early childhood education through assessing sustainable strategies to reduce/remove school fees, we know that our final output will be a study on sustainable strategies to reduce/remove school fees. So what are the steps that would need to be carried out to produce this study? Will it be an internal study, or will we hire an external consultant? What will we do with the findings once the study is produced? We could decide that we would prefer for the study to be conducted externally. So the first major action step is hiring a consultant to conduct the study. We can then say the second step would be to hold a 2-day workshop with the main concerned stakeholders on the study findings, and the third step would be to disseminate the study findings more widely. Note that you could of course break down the action steps in even greater detail, but to keep things simple, try to focus on 3 to 5 major action steps for each activity. For activity 1.1.1.2 on implementing school feeding programs, our action steps could be determine ECE school selection criteria for school feeding programs, procure and distribute utensils and kitchenware to ECE schools, and prepare and serve food to children. And for our third activity, providing targeted cash grants to families, the action steps could be to first determine the beneficiary selection criteria and the disbursement method, then to identify the beneficiaries, and finally to distribute the cash grants to families. The next step will be indicating who is the responsible body for implementing the activity and what is the expected timing over the 5 years of our plan. For our first activity, we can say that it is the ECE department that is spearheading this initiative. Depending on the activity, there may be a different responsible body for different action steps. For the timing in this case, we can say that all of these action steps will take place during year 1. So we will put X's in year 1. After we have defined the action steps and the responsible body, the next step will be to determine the costing information. If it is a major activity, such as school feeding or cash grants, it is likely already costed in the financial simulation model. For the other smaller activities, such as studies, workshops, trainings, etc., we will have to cost them ourselves. Note that while in this example we are using the unit cost shown here, please feel free to make up the unit costs when you do the exercise yourself. For example, for the first action step of the first activity, we will need the cost of a consultant. We can refer to the unit cost for the daily rate of consultants and decide if we want an international or national consultant. Let's say international for this activity. As you can see, the daily rate of an international consultant is $600, and for this study, we can say that we'll need them for 50 days. 50 times 600 equals $30,000 for this action step. We would therefore enter International Consultant Daily Rate in the column Unit of Measurement, $600 per day in the unit cost, 50 for the quantity over the period, and $30,000 for the total budgeted action. For the next action step, we want to hold a 2-day workshop. We can see that a 2-day workshop costs $8,000, so we would enter 2-day workshop in the unit of measurement, $8,000 for the unit cost, and 1 over the planned period. $8,000 times 1 equals $8,000 for the total budget of this action. For our third action step, we may decide that we want 500 printed copies of the study findings to be disseminated. We would write printed and distributed copy of 50 pages in the unit of measurement, $15 in the unit cost, and 500 in total over plan period. The total budget of this action would therefore be $15 times 500, or $7,500. To get the total budget of the activity, we just add up the action steps. For activity 1, this would be $30,000 plus $8,000 plus $7,500, which equals $45,500, which we can then write in the total budget activity column. We can then continue all of these steps for all of our activities. Remember that if the item is already included in the financial simulation model, it will already be costed there, so you can refer directly to the cost included in the model and indicate it here in the table. You can see that we have done so for school feeding and distribution of cash grants. There may be other related action steps in these activities not included in the financial simulation model price that we will have to cost, however. Some action steps might actually be no costs because they consist of work that will be done internally in the department in charge. This is the case for determine school selection criteria for school feeding programs and for determine beneficiary selection criteria and disbursement method. We have therefore written no cost activity in unit of measure and 0 in unit cost and total budget action. An annual action plan can then be a similar format to the multi-year plan, but detailed with just the action steps that will be carried out for that particular year. It could be detailed by month, as we have done here, or by quarter. Let's now look briefly at implementation arrangements and capacity. In addition to the implementation responsibilities detailed in the multi-year action plan, structures to oversee and advise on implementation are generally needed and described in the ESP. This is often very similar to the three-tiered participatory structure developed for ESP preparation and monitoring and evaluation. To the extent possible, the structure should be based on existing structures. At the lowest level are all of the departments in charge of overseeing specific programs. They will be responsible for preparing annual operational plans and day-to-day monitoring and program implementation. At the next level is the Strategic Monitoring Committee, which will oversee plan implementation in a more comprehensive way, ensuring coordination between the different departments and deliberating about higher-level decisions to keep plan implementation on track. This committee is generally composed of department directors and chaired by a high-ranking officer. Moving from these technical levels to the policy level, the Joint Steering Committee created during plan preparation can be maintained. This committee will continue to be the linking mechanism between the ministry and the major development partners and will advise the minister on major policy decisions at different moments of the plan's implementation, especially at annual, midterm, and final reviews. Implementation structures will, of course, vary by country, depending on specific needs and the structures already in place. It is also crucial to ensure that there is sufficient capacity within the education sector to carry out plan implementation. The ability of the ministry to implement its plan and programs will depend on many factors, not all of which are under control of the ministry. In some cases, it might be helpful to conduct an institutional analysis to highlight problem areas and help ministries overcome capacity constraints. An overall analysis of capacity for plan implementation must examine the following: the public sector management and institutions, the effectiveness of educational administration, the profiles and competencies of officers, and the analysis of aid effectiveness principles. First, we will look at public sector management and institutions. This includes the quality of public administration and civil service management, quality of budgetary and financial management, efficiency of resource mobilization, including for subsector priorities, and transparency and accountability. Effectiveness of educational administration includes the clarity of roles and responsibilities within the administration, the link between roles and structures, communication and coordination, preparedness for crisis and disaster situations, and monitoring and evaluation. The profiles and competencies of officers includes officers' qualifications, skills, training, incentives, and gender. Lastly, analysis of aid effectiveness principles is looking at to what extent external resources support the development of national systems and capacity, whether key stakeholders are involved in supporting implementation through the annual joint sector review process, and to what extent donor or government support is harmonized. The draft plan should be reviewed against each of these capacity factors. Depending on the overall analysis of the capacity to implement the ESP, some objectives and ambitions may have to be revised. A capacity development chapter can also be included within the plan, or a capacity development priority program within a subsector to address identified core capacity constraints. Wow! We have now officially covered all of the phases of the plan preparation process. Good work! To close up this last presentation, let's see what happens once ESP development is completed. Once the various parts of the plan have been drafted by the technical working groups, they will be consolidated into a single document. As a reminder, here is a typical outline of an ESP document. You will see that it includes all of the phases we have covered. Chapter 1, a brief overview of the education sector analysis. Chapter 2, policy priorities and strategies. Chapter 3, programs and activities, or priority programs. Chapter 4, costing and financing. Chapter 5, the monitoring, evaluation, and learning framework. Chapter 6, implementation arrangements. And finally, annexes, such as the operational plan, and additional elements, including a risk assessment or communication strategy. The plan may then undergo an appraisal or assessment process and endorsement by the local education group. These steps are optional, but they do constitute a requirement for GPE-eligible countries who wish to apply to GPE funding. This type of appraisal can be a very interesting exercise because it shows you the overall strength of the plan. The plan will then finally be adopted by the Parliament. Here are some of the questions that the appraisal seeks to answer. Has the plan preparation process been country-led, participatory, and transparent? Leadership and participation. Does the plan constitute a solid corpus of strategies and actions addressing the key challenges of the education sector? Soundness and relevance. Are the issues of equity, efficiency, and learning soundly addressed to increase sector performance? Key issues of equity, efficiency, and learning. Is there consistency between the various components of the ESP? Coherence. Do the financing, implementation, and monitoring arrangements offer a good perspective for achievement? Feasibility, implementability, monitorability. You should be proud of yourself. You are now experts in the development of education sector plans. This week, you will be developing a multi-year operational plan for your own priority program. Then for your final assignment, you will be consolidating the main ESP elements you have developed: your priority program template, results matrix, and annual operational plan for your final graded submission. Do not hesitate to review any of the PowerPoints if you need refreshers while working on these elements.